and welcome back to the 2018 Small Farms Winter Webinar Series, hosted by the University of Illinois Extension's Local Food Systems and Small Farms team. This is Zach Grant here. I'm the Extension Local Food Systems Small Farm Educator up here in Cook County. You heard from me last week with our updated High Tunnels webinar, and you've been hearing from me via email coordinating the entire series, and I will be moderating most of the remaining sessions. So we really appreciate you guys joining us for these webinars, and we're going to do our best to begin and end within the space of the lunch hour here. This is a tight time frame for our educators to deliver this in-depth, actionable information, so please understand why we're limiting your questions to the text box over on the left during the presentation. I will do my best to answer the question if I can in the text box. Otherwise, I'll hold those questions until the end for Grant, or I'll interject if it's really something important that we actually need to address. So we're going to make sure we have some time at the end to allow him to answer. So if you need to log off because we are over time and it's getting close to 1 and we're still recording, feel free to log off. That's fine, because this presentation is currently being recorded, and I will email a link to the archived presentation as soon as possible after this concludes. We're also going to have a short online survey evaluation that some of you filled out last week. There'll be a link, an anonymous link to do that as well. And we really, really appreciate your feedback. Even if you don't watch this live or you log out early and watch the rest of it later, definitely follow that link and provide us with any additional feedback. And there's some information about the audio issues or video issues over in the text box. The best thing that you can do if you have any issues as we move along is to use the little telephone gearbox icon in the bottom right hand corner, and if that doesn't work, then just log off and log back in. That oftentimes can really help, or switch between audio devices will help as well. So this week's presentation is from Grant McCarty. Grant is my fellow local food systems and small farms educator. He's housed up in our driftless unit of Joe Davies, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties in far northwest Illinois. Grant's originally from East Tennessee, and he works primarily with commercial and backyard growers and producers, providing resources in fruit and vegetable production. His area of expertise includes soils management, hops production, general organic and sustainable crop production, alternative crops, and general fruit and vegetable production. He further assists stakeholders within the local food system in helping them to expand their operation, adopt new practices, and better manage their current production. Grant received a bachelor's degree in sociology from Maryville College in 2008 and a Master of Science in Plant Sciences from the University of Tennessee in 2012. His graduate project involved research to find a sustainable alternative to methyl bromide in bell pepper and tomato production. As a comical aside, Grant and I are often confused with each other on both our team and statewide. Just remember, he is first name Grant and I am last name Grant. Thanks so much for joining us today, Grant. Go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Zach Grant. I appreciate the introduction and the biography. So yes, today is going to be certified organic production as far as an introduction, and I like this slide. I did not pick it, but if you have ever worked in certified organic production, you know that usually the vegetables do not look like this. But we'll get into that as we go along. So here's a bit what today's plan is going to be. I want to just talk a little bit about the history of the organic program and how we got to the National Organic Program. I want to touch a bit on the certification process and what that's involved in, especially for those who might be looking at pursuing that certification. And then utilizing kind of the National Organic Program, we're going to talk about techniques and strategies when it comes to these 4 areas. These 4 major areas that most fruit and vegetable farmers deal with, but what organic farmers tend to really worry a bit about and really have to really manage in a certain way. What you'll find out as we kind of get into these techniques and strategies is that you're probably already doing a lot of these. So there's really not going to be any surprises in some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. But I am going to include a large portion on the use of organic pesticides, which is also known as the Omri pesticides in organic production. And of course, as any good extension educator would do, I'll leave you with some resources to wrap us up today. So yes, Zach has kind of covered all of this, but now you see what my photo looks like, so that kind of helps you know who I am. Yeah, I am on the Wisconsin-Illinois border, about 8 miles from the Wisconsin state line. My work in organic production was at the University of Tennessee, which has a certified organic vegetable farm. While I was there, I was an assistant on a number of research projects, including variety trials, cover cropping systems, high tunnel, low tunnel productions, strawberry production, a lot of work with cover crops and no-till systems, green manures, biofumigation, and then some organic pesticide work. All of my research was at the organic farm, and so I was managing a field in an organic system on a daily basis and got to really see what an organic farm looks like. I was also fortunate to be there as they were transitioning, which we'll talk about today. So I was there while they were going through the transitioning process and got to see what that was like, as well as what certification then was like. So I'll talk a little about some of these things as we go along, kind of what I've seen in some of the work, not only in Tennessee, but also with some of the organic farms that I work with in the state of Illinois and the Midwest. So to get to the National Organic Program, which we're going to kind of talk about today, we need to talk about kind of the history of how we got there. We have kind of 4 people who are really involved in this. We have Sir Albert Howard, who we consider the father of organic agriculture, and he had the Agricultural Testament of 1943 that really pushed a lot of these principles of compost, soil fertility, and interaction between practices and crops. Walter Northburn, who was the first to use the word organic as a method of farming, and he called it kind of farming as an organic whole. We have Lady Eve Balfour, who was the founder of Britain's The Soil Association, and her main contribution was publishing The Living Soil. Another part that she was involved in was the Hawley experiment, which was in Britain and was a kind of side-by-side comparison of utilizing conventional fertilizers with organic animal plant-based fertilizers to see what the yield differences and other characteristics were. This was a project that continued for many decades, but after some time, the project was stopped. And the research was a little bit inconclusive as far as kind of what the major noticeable differences were. And then from United States, J.I. Rodell, most of us know as far as organic farming and gardening, is the publisher of that, as well as the Rodell Institute. What I want to point out to you with all 4 of these is the focus of soil. And that's really what you're going to find as you start pursuing certification. It's a strong focus on soil science, soil biology, interactions of the soil and the crops that you're going to grow. So then to talk a bit about the USDA National Organic Program and how we got here. Kind of the milestone is 1979, California is the first state to adopt legal standards for organic production. There are other states that then begin this. So if I am, for instance, a farm in California, I can reach out to my Department of Agriculture and they have a set standard for organic production. However, the organic productions in this state might be entirely different from another state at this time. So, we think about Illinois, where if I'm an Illinois farmer and I have become certified organic, and then I decide to sell this produce in St. Louis area, Missouri may have different organic standards. And because of these discrepancies was what was going to then lead to the National Organic Program, which we see today. 1980, USDA Report and Recommendations comes out on organic farming and basically says, we should probably talk to the organic farms. That's what the USDA says. Between 1980 and 1990, we then finally get the Organic Foods Protection Act of 1990. And it basically creates a national organic standards across the board. It's part of the USDA. There is also a National Organic Standards Board, and this is made up of 15 members. This includes growers, business owners, researchers, all who are heavily involved in organic production. I looked at the website this week to see who was a part of this, and I noticed a lot of growers who I'm pretty familiar with in the Midwest. And they usually serve between 4 to 6 years on this board. And basically what happens is, regulations come up or parts of the organic industry push for changes, and this board then brings these up for vote. Usually they're also open for public comment in a period of time. And then from there, the National Organic Production will determine the actions and really enforce the regulations. I will say, for the last couple of years, there has been a lot of, controversial issues come up on to the board. We've seen in organic apple production the utilization of streptomycin, which is used to control fire blight in apple and pear production. That chemical has been sunsetted and was very heatedly debated and a lot of public comment on it, but it has now been removed from production. This past fall, the aquaponics, hydroponics, and aeroponics was voted to be allowed to pursue certification in organic systems. Beforehand, those farms could not be considered certified organic, nor be pursuing them. I'll talk a bit about that going forward in a couple slides. But we're seeing a lot of changes happening, a lot of changes coming up to this board, and a lot of really close votes with some of these things that are happening. Give you a snapshot of what the United States looks like when it comes to certified organic agriculture. In 2014, we had about 14,000 farms. We had about 3.7 million acres under production. Of this that's being sold, most is going to wholesale markets. So it is being used in organic chips that are being sold at grocery stores, is being used in organic feed that might be going to, say, organic livestock. So it's not always going, through the farmer's market to the buyer. It is going into much larger markets. As far as what Illinois looks like, in 2014 we had about 249 certified exempt farms with about 41,000 acres under production that's certified. Exempt farm, if a farm is exempt, it is a farm that has less than $5,000 in sales, and it's not required to pursue certification, but it can still kind of call itself organic. I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but just know that that's where the exempt is coming from. Of the 249, we have 56 farms in vegetable and fruit production, about 678 acres. 168 farms are in what we call the agronomic crops, so about 30,000 acres of corn, soybean, grains. All of those is comprising that 30,000. Close to 10,000 is actually in soybeans. I am aware that 56 plus 168 does not equal 249. Including in that 249 farms is dairy, is other processors and operations too. But a lot of times when we think of organic production, we think that it is fruit and vegetable, and a lot of times that really isn't the case. It is the more large-scale soybean and corn. 2011, 150 farms were certified organic or exempt, about 30,000 acres. So an increase of about 10,000 acres is what we see in Illinois in a couple of years. Nationwide, there was actually a decrease in 2014 of farms that were certified organic and of acreage. Illinois is one of the few that actually bucked this trend and increased production. We, as far as the number of farms and as far as what states have the most certified organic farms, Illinois is kind of the middle of the road. Wisconsin, California, Oregon, and many others really lead the way when it comes to certified production. So now let's define what organic production is. And I should have said earlier, we are really talking about national organic programs, so the USDA's program. A lot of times people have used the word organic to mean that it's pesticide free or it's natural or it's green. But really what we're talking about with organic production is this USDA program. Just a caveat there. So defined by the USDA, we have organic production as ecological management that promotes and enhances biodiversity, biological cycles, and soil biological activity. It's a system, and that system really responds to different things regarding the cultural, biological, and mechanical methods that I utilize when I grow crops. What they also give you is that each farm is unique and cannot really have uniform management. For instance, the farm at University of Tennessee, one border of the farm has a railroad that goes through it. And so that then requires much larger buffer zones to be in place. Whereas a farm down the road that might be certified organic that doesn't have a railroad doesn't have to have as many large scale buffers as the University of Tennessee's farm did. Another thing to point out with both of these definitions, a focus on soil, a focus on biology, and a focus on ecology. That's really getting to what the heart of organic production is, and especially as new regulations and rules are changed and modified, it all is coming back to this definition. So what do I mean then by culturally, biologically, and mechanically? What am I managing here? I really am micromanaging. I'm managing my plants, my insects, bacteria, fungi, my water, nutrients. All of them are being managed, and it is both the ones that I want to keep on my property and grow and harvest from, but also the ones that I do not want on my property. We're managing these very microscopic, as you can imagine, and we're kind of in an organic system really making sure that we have plans in place to really manage them. Both culturally, biologically, and mechanical are going to appear later. So we're going to use those three and really explain, okay, what is a cultural management practice that I could use for addressing disease problems. So you might look at this, of course, and as you look at certification, decide, why the heck would I become certified? A lot of times, especially the growers that I work with, the customers want this certification. They are wanting certified organic produce. And whether this is the person at the farmer's market or whether this is the person that I'm selling wholesale to, they're wanting some kind of certification, and they certainly want the organic certification. That's why they're wanting that. You may also think long term, if you're planning to pursue markets, especially whether this is through fresh produce, whether this is value added, where you're actually making some of this produce or some of these grains into jams, jellies, other things like that. And even larger wholesale. If you're planning to pursue those larger markets, you might pursue certification. It really comes up down to you. Well, there are going to be costs, which we'll talk about today, and there's going to be a lot of time and commitment that you wouldn't have had to go through otherwise if you hadn't pursued certification. So really think about who your customer is or who your potential customer might be, and go ahead and start figuring that out. Keep in mind, of course, as you pursue certification, you either may attract or you may alienate your customers. Really depends a lot on what you're after here. So now for the fiscal side of all of this. To pursue certification and to work with an agency to certify you as being certified organic, costs are derived from not only an application, an annual inspection fee, and an annual certification fee. Usually the annual certification fee is tied to the gross sales that you have per year. And I will say that most of the sales under, say, 200, 300,000 tend to be pretty similar. So you're not really going to see much difference in a certification fee for sales that are less than 50 or between 50 and 100,000. When you get higher and higher up, that's really where you see a lot of it, the changes in the certification fee. On average, and this is just an average here with the asterisk, you should expect $900 to $1,300 per year to pay for your certification to this agency. You'll also have to pay for an inspector to come to your property, not only their hourly fee, potentially their travel fee, and some other fees might be in there that you're not necessarily expecting to have. Keep in mind too, as you pursue certification, there are additional things that you now have to pay for a premium on. Organic seed, having tests done on your soil and on manure that you wouldn't have had otherwise, purchasing organic pesticides that can be pretty expensive, all of which begin to really kind of add to your bottom line. Of course, a lot of this depends greatly on your certifying agency and what they'll charge, and most of them are very upfront when it comes to this. There's been a lot of push over the last couple of years to actually have a cost share, and so a lot of state Department of Agricultures will have cost share for a farm in their state pursuing certification. This percent that they may cover may be between 50 to 75%. Some may be a little bit higher than that. But yes, reaching out to your Department of Agriculture can help you see if there's a cost share available to you. And they would be cost share that would cover your certification. So you've decided that you want to become certified organic. So what is this meaning and how do I start this process? What's basically happening when you start pursuing this is that you're verifying compliance with the USDA National Organic Program's rules and regulations. So you're spending this time period really beginning to understand the rules, adopt these practices, and get started in pursuing this certification. It is a 3-year process. So during this 3 years, you consider transitioning. If I'm selling at a farmer's market, I still cannot label my products organic. I'm still considered transitioning during this time. I would mention here, think about when you want to transition and start the transitioning. While it is a 3-year process, you may find that it's a little bit easier to transition in the fall compared to, say, during the growing season. Because as you can imagine, once the 3 years is up and then you're during the growing season, 1 week in July, you're considered transitioning, and then the next week, you're finally certified organic. You maybe have to decide whether you're going to change your marketing because of that. And in turn, you may have to change some of your pricing, especially if you're selling at a farmer's market. I've known some farms that have really taken that to heart and really considered the transitioning period because you may want to move outside of the growing season, or at least into the fall or early part of the season. All right, so what you do then is utilize a certification agency. You reach out to a certifying agency to get the paperwork started to pursue certification. There's a lot of nonprofits that do the certification, and many of them are throughout the United States. You'll probably find that your certification agency is not within your state, and that's fine. A lot of times folks actually pursue certification with different agencies in other parts of the United States. The USDA has a nice certifier locator for a list that it's available to you, and I would look through that document. Of course, with extension, we do not endorse any certifier or certification agency, so just look at that. So a lot of times we do get the question, why 3 years? And a lot of it is that there is just so much record keeping you have to start doing. Every time you go into the field, you come back, you write what you're doing that day, you're keeping notes, documents, so many things as far as the record keeping is involved in this. And so it really wants to help you start adopting these practices. A lot of it is also starting to build up the soil health. So adopting cover crop practices, crop rotation, adding good manure, nutrient management to your soil. Things like that is really what they're wanting you to do, along with the organic practices that you'll find out as we go along. So yes, decide on that agency, make contact with the agency, and they will send you a very large packet. They will look at your record, you'll divide up your field, you'll start incorporating organic methods, and you'll start setting up a record keeping system. Now, when I was working on the certified organic farm, we had our records that were kept in 2 to 3 inch binders in our farm office. So this was pre-smartphone, and there's a number of good smartphone apps out there that are really helping with the record keeping these days for organic production. And if you have recommendations or you use some of these, feel free to put in the chat box which ones these are. I've used Wave before on certain things, and Wave is a pretty good one too, but I know there's some other ones out there. So this record keeping, ensures that regulations, of course, are being followed, but anything as far as field activities, inputs, seed planting, harvesting, the testing I did on my soil for the season, the testing I did on my manure, any documentations, I tell you, anything you think connected with your farm operation is recorded. And it's a key piece to certification. And I would say sometimes the reason folks decide to get out of organic, or they actually lose some certification, is because of the record keeping. It's just not where it needs to be. But keep in mind you're contributing to a part of this national program, and there are rules and regulations that you're having to follow. And that's really what is at the heart of this record keeping. The certifier, when they come, wants to see all the records when visiting. So every year you have an inspector come to your operation. They view the crops, the buffer zones, equipment, storage area, borders. They really get a feel for what your farm is and walk around it, and really it asks you questions and want to see a lot of things. Typically this is during the growing season, so they actually want to see things happening at the fields as this occurs. They'll audit your records, they'll review your organic safety plan. Usually it's 2 to 3 hours, but it might be a little bit longer. And then they will have an exit interview with you. You'll communicate concerns that they have for your field, and then they will reauthorize your certification or allow you to continue being your transitioning period of time. Transitioning, if you're still in that period. As you're working with these inspectors, know that you want to have a good working relationship with them, especially as issues arise on your field and maybe you need to do changes with your organic safety plan. So if you're pursuing certification and you're already having some issues keeping in contact or reaching a certifier, you might decide to pursue a different one. You really want to have a good relationship with them because they are going to be the ones that make or break you during this process. This slide is adapted from University of Wisconsin. It just kind of shows you kind of what it looks like when you start pursuing certification. You adopt the practices, you submit application as well as the fee. The application is reviewed to verify compliance with regulations. The inspector comes to the field to inspect. The certifying agency reviews the application and the inspector's report to determine if compliant. And then the agency issues the organic certification. All three of the last ones happen every single year. So you're always going to have the on-site inspection, and you're always going to have the certification issued again. Other keywords out there as you start pursuing organic certification, many of which will be defined in the packets that you get from these agencies. Material list, kind of everything that's going into your field as far as fertilizers, insecticides, fungicides, all of which are Omri approved substances, which we'll talk about today. The boundary, the area between the organic and the non-organic area, as well as the buffer zone, which is the area between the boundary and organic production to prevent contact with prohibited substances. Both the boundary and the buffer zones can sometimes vary from farm to farm, and we can't always give a good average as far as what this amount must be. A lot of it will really be due to what your farm map shows, which gets us to our farm map. Details of permanent buildings, fields, field boundaries, buffer zones, all of that is going into my farm map. So you're not going to pursue organic certification. You've decided you're not going to pursue that, but you still want to, have something as far as being involved in this more organic, sustainable thing. Know, of course, that you can be exempt with 5,000 in annual sales. You can still kind of call yourself organic. You cannot use the organic seal. Your products cannot be used in organic processing that would be going into a certified organic product. So there's a couple catches here with it. But just know to be very kind of careful as you pursue this, because sometimes they will actually want to see your annual sales if you haven't pursued certification, but you still are kind of calling yourself organic. It's kind of a bit of a gray area, even though it's not necessarily a gray area. I know it's a very confusing statement. Know that the term organic is trademarked. So when I use the term organic in any of my marketing, and I'm not certified, nor am I pursuing certification, there's an $11,000 fine if I'm caught per instant. So that may be that I have distributed this out to my email list. I may be using the symbol at the market, and I'm not certified organic. All of these are different instances where I could come back and have a fine towards me. Know that a lot of it's an extension saying there's so many other good marketing words out there available to you. They're sustainable, environmentally friendly, natural, local, all of which don't really have a connotation to them nor certification behind them. Some do, of course, But these four terms are ones that are available to you to use. And so instead of using the term organic and you're not organic, try to think of some other good marketing words to utilize. There is a Certified Naturally Grown program, and it is similar to the USDA program. It is not a USDA organic program, though. It's actually run by a nonprofit. And it is one that some growers I know will actually pursue if they're just looking for a certification. It follows pretty strict rules similar to the organic certification, but it is farmers inspecting farmers. So if I'm a farmer and I pursue organic certification, or I'm sorry, Certified Naturally Grown certification, I will pursue that with the expectation that I will then also inspect another farm, a part of that. There are extension agents and educators that will actually inspect farms as far as the Certified Naturally Grown program. I have done a couple of them in my area, and so you may find where you live that you could reach out to your extension educator to actually help you pursue this. Quickly on these, certified organic fruit, in most cases, these perennial crops can be certified. I do not have to remove these perennial crops and start over again. It does depend, of course, on what my farm is like and what I'm dealing with. But in most cases, we can really kind of have those established and just be able to certify them organic. The one caveat here is, though, organic fruit, certified organic fruit, is very hard to grow due to disease and insect pressure. There are Omri pesticides available, but a lot of them are very expensive, and a lot of them may not do as good of a job as the conventional pesticides. In general, the smaller fruits tend to be a little bit easier than trees. So you see raspberries, blueberries, strawberries. Although, while we say easiest, in the Midwest, we're dealing with spotted wing Drosophila on raspberries and blueberries. On strawberries, if you've grown them before, you know you deal with a lot of bacterial issues and funguses as well. And then, so all three of those do have their diseases and insect problems. Apples, of course, if you're in an area with high fire blight present, you may find that you don't have something to really control it well. The hardest tend to be peaches and grapes, and that, of course, deals a lot with the disease pressure on both of those. They really require a lot of organic pesticides to really control both of those diseases. Other organic markets, grains, legumes, a lot of those other agronomic crops. If you listen to Bill Davidson's talk coming up on our Small Farms Winter Webinar Series, he goes into great detail about the grains and the Midwestern variety trials and grower groups that are being established, as well as infrastructure. You can pursue livestock, eggs, dairy as organic markets. I am not familiar as much with them because I am more of a vegetables and fruits kind of guy. The standards for them tend to address soil, grazing, herd health, pasture, biodiversity. You'll also find that you do have to have certified organic feed for these, which is another additional cost. As I mentioned earlier, the aquaponics, hydroponics, it is allowed under organic production, but it is one that really depends highly on the certifier. And there still is not enough rules on the organic production market as far as just what this looks like. Really a lack of consistency so far between these agencies is what we see. And as you can see with the definition of what organic production is, you're dealing with two systems that do not have soil. And so I think that's where a lot of people have really had some issues with it. And a couple of times already, Omri, Organic Materials Review Institute. I'm going to talk about that at the end today, and we'll have about 4 slides on it. But Omri is organic pesticides. I just saw someone ask that, so I will go ahead and mention that acronym. Okay, so we're going to become a certified organic farm. What's this going to look like? We are going to have to use organic seeds and plants. This will be those that are grown on a certified organic farm. We will also be either purchasing or starting plants as organic seeds using organic growing media. Those are 3 things that we've got to have when we become certified organic. And now I'm going to get to the biological, cultural, and physical properties. What does this look like? We're going to look at 4: insects, weed, soil, and disease, and kind of look and see what these look like. So for insect management, biological would be utilizing natural predators. So if I'm in high tunnels, I maybe will release natural predators. If I'm growing this out in the field, I would actually try to create buffer zones to attract predators to address the insects that I'm dealing with. The cultural, physical things would be floating row covers, high tunnel production, potentially crop rotation depending on the insect. I might be doing trap cropping where I have a crop at the edge of my perimeter and I'm using it to attract away the really bad insects I don't want. And then Omri pesticides. So Organic Materials Review Institute pesticides would be what I would be using. So to pick out one of these, row cover, I would use row cover as a physical barrier. This will be on my cabbage family, cucurbits, eggplant, and many others. As you note though, eggplant and cucurbits, so cucurbits being the cucumber family, melons and others, they need pollination. So I put this row cover out for a while, but when it flowered, I would need to remove this so that they could be pollinated properly. But this would be a tool to kind of have a physical barrier to keep these insects out. Weed management in the organic system. So, cover crops is one useful tool for this. Crop rotation, depending on the crop that you're growing. Inorganic or organic mulches, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Being mindful of tilling and hand tools. And if you've worked on any certified organic farms, or you sometimes have just grown fruits and vegetables in general, it's a lot of hand pulling in the organic systems. Yes, there are herbicides available, but most of these are not as effective, they could be expensive, and they don't always target the right weed species. Cover crops is one of the major cornerstones of weed management in the organic system. The other piece is the inorganic or organic mulches. So the inorganic meaning that it is a product that will not break down into the soil. The organic mulch meaning it's going to actually break down into the soil. My inorganic mulches is my polyethylene mulch. And this is where we get a little bit into some controversy because the polyethylene mulch is an oil-based product. It has to be removed at the end of the season and it is typically thrown away. It is not recycled because of the debris that is on this mulch. The newspapers, cardboard, paper, all of which can be used as inorganic or rather organic and break down with some restrictions. But the biodegradable mulches on the market, there's currently only one allowed based on the standards. They still find that the biodegradable mulches are not breaking down as much as they should. But the polyethylene mulch that you see here in the photo is still used substantially in organic production. And the reason is that when it comes to weed management, we all know that organic systems have some issues when it comes to managing them. And so the mulch tied with the cover cropping systems are kind of two cornerstones when it comes to really making us help and address the weed problems on organic properties. For soil fertility, building up organic matter, managing soil pH, the soil nutrients. There's a number of strategies that we're doing for this, which includes crop rotation, cover cropping, minimizing our tilling, even sometimes using mulches such as the organic mulches that will break down, but also the soil amendments. So with soil amendments, we have the compost and there's animal manure. So compost can be used in the system, but it has to be made in a certain way, which you see the guidelines there. It is one that has to be based on the carbon to nitrogen ratio and temperature. I also have to test the compost to make sure it's appropriate. The other thing that I can use in the organic system is animal manures. And so these can come from conventional systems that can be allowed for production, but the certifier usually requires testing on this animal manure. Here's a rule that we do have in the organic system. So I can apply raw manure 120 days prior to harvest if the edible portion comes into contact with the soil. So leafy greens, radishes, carrots, if I grow those, I can apply raw manure incorporated 120 days. For the other avenue then, 90 days, I can apply this prior to for crops where the edible portion does not come into contact. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, all of those is under the 90-day rule. The 120-day rule is one that may change in the years to come. With FSMA and with some other food safety issues, I'm starting to think it will probably be one that will be changed and modified. Not mentioned on this slide is that all fertilizers have to be coming from an animal or plant-based source. So this is coming from my cover crops that add nitrogen to the soil. It is bat guano, it is chicken litter, it is fish emulsion. All of those are utilized and the ones that I'm mainly using. I cannot use those conventional fertilizers. And as you can imagine with all of those, many of them are not within the right nutrient state of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So they have to work themselves into the system. And it can take some time to get there. For our last part, plant disease management, very similar things as we've already seen. Crop rotation, cover cropping, the organic and the inorganic mulches. Even the black plastic can help a bit to keep water from splashing up onto the plant itself. So that's one strategy that can help with disease management. You can use disease-resistant varieties in organic production, and those are ones that are going to be very much encouraged because that will hopefully address disease from really being a problem. But now we're going to get to the Omri approved substances. So Organic Materials Review Institute. So where do pesticides fit within organic production? From the National Organic Program, this is a long definition, but it basically says that we want the farmer to be able to show that they have done everything that they can to address the pest, weed, disease, and other problems. And while they've done all these practices, and this is still a problem with them, then they can utilize a pesticide within this. I have added the physical and cultural practices because what we're really getting here when it comes to where do pesticides fit within production is that my certifier will want to see that I have crop rotated, that I have cover cropped, that I maybe am using mulches to address pest problems, whether that's insect, disease, or weeds. They want to see that I, maybe have disease-resistant varieties too. And then I can be able to utilize the organic pesticides, the Omri-approved substances. This slide just goes in to show that organic pesticides are both man-made and non-man-made. So you can have man-made substances and pesticides used in production, but they do have to reach a certain criteria. So no adverse effects, they're recognized by the FDA to be used in accordance with good practices, and that the nutritional quality of the food is really maintained. So now we're on to Omri-approved pesticides and explain this a bit more. You see Omri listed here. So this is the label that most organic growers are looking for when it comes to determining whether or not they can use this on their production. It's a nonprofit that's based out of Oregon, and basically a company submits what they want on the market to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. There's no adverse effects. It's actually targeting what it's supposed to target. It's important to realize that even though this is Omri listed and I am a certified organic farm and I should be able to use this, I still have to talk with my certification agency in order for them to clear it. The other thing here is a lot of these products are very expensive to utilize and must be economically justified. You may find that the bottle of pesticide that you want to utilize costs close to $300 and you're not going to get it shipped to you in time, or it's not economically justified. So keep that in mind with some of these. But that's what you're looking for, the Omri listed. And whether you're pursuing certification or not pursuing certification, the Omri listed pesticides is what you're going to want to be incorporating into your operation. Just a quick little note. These are still pesticides. Treat them like any other pesticides. Wear the right equipment. Make sure you're adding it to the organic plan but really make sure you read the labeling and follow directions. Yes, they are organic pesticides, but they are still pesticides. I'm going to highlight 3 of these. Surround, which is Kale and Clay. It is one that is a white powder that goes onto the plant material that you see here. It acts as a pretty nice sheath barrier, and really it's more of an irritant on the insect. So the insect is annoyed by it, and they just kind of stop chewing on it. You'll see that it is a white powder that's applied with water. When it rains, all of this dissipates, so you no longer have it on there. But it works for some of our cucumber beetles, stink bugs, squash vine borer. Neem oil, neem soap, non-synthetic oil from the neem tree. It is one where it goes on the insect itself and it keeps them from respiring. And so that's kind of what we see, is that once you put it on the insect, it actually keeps them from doing the air exchange in the insect. You see here the labeling of the neem oil. So commonly you would see Omri listed. You would see then all the other modes of action and precaution you need to take into consideration for this. Pest examples for vegetables: squash bugs, stink bugs, Colorado potato beetle for vegetable production. It can work fairly well for aphids, leaf hoppers, leaf miners, and it has to be used when the insect is present. So it has to go exactly on the insect. There's a lot of different variations available to you. This is also one where I can use, I believe, on a nice weekly interval. I can also just use with a pump sprayer rather. And the last one I want to show you is copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is synthetic. So this is one of our man-made organic pesticides. And it is one that you might commonly hear called as Bordeaux mix, sometimes with grape production. The major reason we utilize copper sulfate is for tomatoes. So late blight, early blight, bacterial spot, and speck. And it's a fungicide that goes to disrupt the spores from germinating. It's one that requires a full spray suit. So it is one that I need to wear personal protective equipment with really well. I also have to utilize it in a way that prevents accumulation in the soil based on the National Organic Program. And it's also one that negatively affects pollinators. So the reason that someone would pursue the copper sulfate is that it's possible they might be losing their crop for the season, and they need to be able to spray something in order to get that crop. So that really is at the heart of sometimes why we are utilizing some of these, especially ones like copper sulfate that require full spray suit and other things, is that I've got to do something or I'm potentially going to lose this organic crop based on the disease that's moving in. All right, so we're wrapping up. So put some questions in the box because we will have some time at the end. Just want to show you a couple of things. Zach has already put some of these links into your chat box. Certainly the National Organic Program has a lot of good information as far as certifying agencies, as well as getting started. Sustainable Agriculture Research Education is SARE, and you see that there with transition to organic production. Managing cover crops properly and crop rotation. If you want to know more about Omri and the Omri products, the Organic Materials Review Institute website is listed. I will say it tends to be a bit more like a search engine. So it doesn't really give you like, okay, what are all the Omri products I could use to address squash beetles? It doesn't have those kind of things. It just kind of has some very generic information there, but still one to look at. The National Extension Program has organic production websites and webinars. Becoming a certified organic producer out of University of Wisconsin, Center for Integrated Ag Systems is 2007. Very nice website. I'm going to plug Illinois Organic Growers Association. So, you know, the IOGA is based out of Illinois. Your state will have other growers associations. These are great groups to work with and network with. Moses Organic out of the Midwest is also a premier organization. Certified Naturally Grown. You can find information there as far as how to get started certification. So wrapping up then, you got to determine if the market is right for you. That's really what I encourage a lot of folks to really do. especially when we look at local foods production. You may be in an area that the buyer is not there, and so you may have to either travel to sell your produce, or you may decide to not pursue certification. For the growers I work with in my 3 counties, there's maybe a handful that are certified organic. And with them being certified organic, they're selling it to the Chicago market. So really ask yourself, really think about that a lot. Ask your buyers or potential buyers if they're interested in pursuing certified products. That really gets into the heart of it sometimes, is finding those new buyers you might think about. Reach out to certification agencies to begin the process too. So this is my phone number, my email address, and then I also have a Facebook page. Yes, it says Northwest Illinois, but it tends to be a bit of a mixed bag of information happening throughout the Midwest, national trends, as well as grants available to farmers and stuff. So I try to update every couple of days as much as I can. All right, Zach, I'm going to take a sip of water and let's get some questions.
Awesome, Grant. So much information. I've jotted down a few things. I've tried to answer as many questions in the chat box as possible, but there's definitely a few we could probably clarify and elaborate on a little bit more. Annie had a pretty high-level question that I tried to not open up that can of worms, but she asked the question: how do you answer people's questions about whether organic foods are safer, more nutritious, or better for the environment, etc. And I think that really in and of itself probably is a much larger discussion. But do you have any? She asked about an elevator speech that you might use, or any sort of response that you typically give?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from a producer standpoint, and I can only talk a lot about, these organic farms are adopting soil health practices that are benefiting the soil, that are building up the soil, and that are keeping it sustainable in that terms. When it comes to nutritional stuff, there's a lot of debate here and there about it.
Yeah, I would agree. You see lots of research that suggests there is no benefit, and then you see some papers that say that there are. But yeah, I think that is a good point in terms of focusing on the soil stewardship aspect of organic production, and focusing on that, and it's also kind of a cultural and worldview type perspective for growers and for consumers, the psychographic influences on why they make purchasing decisions. So it's a much larger question, I think, but a good and relevant question. There was a question earlier in the stream about international certification body for organics, because it is trademarked by the USDA. Is there international recognition for imported foods? And I put a link in there because it looks like the USDA does recognize certain international certifiers as well. Do you have any follow-up for that?
They do, yeah. I mean, I think, and I don't know my timeline as well as I should, but there is, certainly international certifications out there that has allowed for produce to be then moved into the United States. As far as, do their rules, regulations follow stringently with the USDA's? In most cases, my understanding is it doesn't always. And there are certain things that they may be able to utilize overseas that they can't utilize in the United States. For a United States grower, though, they wouldn't be pursuing the international certification, though.
Okay. A question just popped up about, are all Omri approved pesticides compatible to pollinators?
So the question is, will they negatively affect pollinators, I guess? Or
that would probably be what I would assume that they're asking.
So no, not all of them are. There's the one I mentioned, copper sulfate, can negatively affect pollinators. And a lot of times these Omri pesticides that are used do come with, caveats of be mindful of how it's being applied, of when you apply it. And they still can be allowed in production. So I think there is a lot of push, though, towards, if you're utilizing these, try to apply them in the evening where the pollinators are not flying. But certainly, yeah, you've got to be a little mindful of that with some of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned reading the labels and how important it is to understand how to read labels, regardless of if it's an Omri approved product or not. So understanding what the label recommendations are will really help guide how they might affect pollinators. So great question. Let's see here. Someone had a question about organic type mulches, pecan shells, pine needles. I just simply put in terms of if you're looking for to utilize organic mulches that you need to pay attention to carbon and nitrogen ratios. But I don't. I mean, there's lots of options out there, obviously, in terms of if you're not using a plastic or a biodegradable plastic, options for organic type mulches. Do you have any recommendations or comments about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you're looking at those that are going to break down into the soil, trying to have a good mixture of different organic materials is the best option, just so that you can have, not only the fast degradation of one of them, but further on, another one would degrade too. So having kind of a mixture is really beneficial.
Great. And I put multiple times a link in here. I don't know if you saw it. I kept having some issues with the chat box, but there's a link on here that says that I said check the efficacy of Omri products here. And there's a really good resource out there from Cornell University called the Organic Insect and Disease Management Resource Guide. And it lists a lot of the Omri products, and it actually has a lot of efficacy trials based on different crop families and which ones worked well for them in their setting and which ones didn't. So I put a link in there. I really think that's a really good reference. Do you have any other materials like that you've run across?
I would recommend the Cornell guides as well. Both all the ones that they offer as far as the organic insect and disease, I mean, really give you a good snapshot of what you're going to have to manage and what's available to you. Even if you're, looking at the Midwestern fruit and vegetable production guides,
yep,
they will always include Omri products. So they don't always, they'll list as many as they can, and a lot of times they are taking some studies with them. But just know that you'll see those listed too.
Right. And I also posted a link when you mentioned the cost share. It looked as if the Illinois Department of Agriculture was offering cost shares in 2016, maybe 2017, but I could not find any information about the status of that program for this calendar year. Do you have any further information about that, or is that program on hold in terms of cost sharing?
I don't know if it's really been announced for 2018 just yet. I know 2017 there was an email that came through, and usually I feel like it's more the spring when this happens. I would still look for it because you will find I feel like we've had it probably every year.
Yep. And I posted that link earlier in the chat box if you can find it. It's a link to the Illinois Department of Agriculture Organic Cost Sharing Program for last season. So you can use that link and maybe keep refreshing that occasionally and seeing if there's any updates to that. Okay, so another question came in here. Is there an alternative certification available besides CNG as the NOP standards widen to accommodate agribusiness? So certified naturally grown, I think, is what CNG stands for. Are you aware of any other new certifications on the horizon besides certified naturally grown?
Yeah, certified naturally grown is the only one I'm aware of that has a bit of the similar kind of certification that some folks are pursuing. As far as the widening agribusiness, when it gets into more livestock and other things, you will find different ones out there that have a different certification. Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of them though.
Okay. No, that's a really great question, and I know you mentioned the current sort of discussion out there about hydroponics certification. I think I recently saw a letter from the USDA mentioning that hydroponics had always been allowed in the organic program, that this round of commenting in terms of changing that rule was to assess whether or not it was going to be continued to be allowed, but yet they were considering aeroponics and aquaponics in that new standard as well. And I believe it said that they were we're not allowing aeroponics, but aquaponics and hydroponics would continue to be allowed to be organically certified.
Yeah, and they came out with a statement today actually on the aeroponics that it is allowed. But yeah, as I mentioned, there's only a handful of certifiers right now that are certifying hydroponics and aquaponics.
Mm.
So you'll have to kind of look more into that, and mostly their webs. I think a lot of the West Coast certifiers that are doing it currently, which farm in Illinois can be certified from a West Coast one. That's not a problem.
And speaking of audits, what I really notice, and when we talk to growers about the Food Safety Modernization Act and certified third-party gap audits, the similarities between organic certification and third-party gap certification in terms of the, food safety plan for gaps and the organic safety plan for organics, the sort of similarities to it and the comparisons in terms of how this is, it is organic certification for a grower might be all about your growing practices and beliefs in those systems, but it's also a marketing tactic to get into different markets as well for certain growers.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's for a farm that has gone through organic certification and then pursues FSMA and GAPS, I really think that you're going to have a much stronger, an easier time in some ways because you're already used to all this record keeping.
Right. There's overlap. And you mentioned the record keeping software. I put in Google Forms as, I mean, there's some real power in Google Forms in the ability to create a record keeping templates that you can track on your smartphone that populate separate spreadsheets that are maintained in the cloud. But I know that CogPro is one that does both gap record keeping and organic record keeping. I've never used it, but that's just one that I've heard of out there. I can't advocate for it either way, but that's just another example. Okay, well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, I would just like to thank Grant one more time for the awesome presentation. A lot of knowledge packed there in a 1 hour period, and for sharing his expertise and alleviating some confusion surrounding organic certification. I'd also like to thank everyone for joining the webinar. I'm hoping that the information will help you in your small farm endeavors or your organic certification endeavors, and something you can put in place this winter for the upcoming season. So look for an email from us for the archived webinar that we're going to put on the Illinois Local Foods YouTube channel as usual, as well as a short evaluation from us, a short Qualtrics evaluation that we'd really appreciate your feedback on. But with that, have a fabulous rest of your day and a productive start to the 2018 season.